So Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a thing, and it should be treasured by everyone because there's no way a movie like this will ever get made again, and that isn't for lack of trying. There have been several attempts to get sequels and prequels made for this movie, but I have this feeling that it will never happen. I hope I'm wrong about that because I will happily put my foot in my mouth in that case. But this movie is so bizarre in that it includes all manner of beloved children's cartoons from many different animation studios, and yet the tone and comedy of the movie is super not for children. Like, at all. My introduction to this movie was in a roundabout way. When I was young, the Looney Tunes Back in Action movie came out. I remember liking the idea of cartoons and live action together, but I don't remember anything else from that movie. So of course it was only right that after I discovered the 1996 classic masterpiece that is Space Jam. I remember this one more vividly, and I can quote the whole movie verbatim.
Dodson! Dodson! We've got Dodson here! See, nobody cares.
Oh, wait, no, that's the other Wayne Knight film. Jurassic Park. That's the one I can quote verbatim. Either way, Space Jam is dope. Because of this cartoon live-action crossover interest I had, I was always vaguely aware of Roger Rabbit, but I'd never gotten around to watching it, and no one really pushed me to see it in my youth. It was only after I'd seen it did I understand why that might have been. The Looney Tunes and other animated shows have always had hints of adult humor for the parents and adults watching.
You wanna play a little one-on-one?
But never like this before. Or since. This movie had swearing, and both cartoons and people straight up die right on screen. The whole tone of the movie has a classic detective noir feel to it, and there's the use and abuse of alcohol. There was no doubt in my mind why the adults in my life were not eager for me to watch this movie when I was younger. But I'm grown up now, or at least in age anyway. And I really do think this movie is special. I rewatched it recently, and it got me thinking about one aspect of the movie that I haven't mentioned yet. Probably the most famous or infamous part of this movie. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that everyone is always talking about. How did they get Bob Hoskins inside a cartoon? No, I'm only joking. I'm of course talking about Jessica Rabbit. Watching the film recently with a more critical mindset, I'm really intrigued by Jessica Rabbit. And it's not in the way that you're thinking. Jessica Rabbit is absolutely iconic, and it's not hard to see why, but what really makes her stand out isn't how she looks, although that's part of it, and we'll get to that, but it's what she represents and how her sexuality and role in the film are constantly redefined in both film criticism and feminist discourse. The movie's tone, Jessica's characterization, the fact that she's animated, and the general act of filming and watching all play into the complex nature of what might be the most interesting character in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And so today, I want to talk about who's framing Jessica Rabbit. I don't care who you are, that may not be funny, but Who's Framing Jessica Rabbit is definitely the cleverest thing I've ever come up with. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was an adaptation of the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe. The executives at Disney were immediately impressed with the idea and almost immediately bought the rights for a film version back in 1981. They started by hiring screenwriters to help with the transition from page to screen. It was during this time that the already famous director Robert Zemeckis offered himself up to direct, but Disney was unsatisfied with his latest movies and turned him down. Supposedly there were tests being done around this time with an entirely different cast to see if the kind of technical feats required to make a live action and cartoon movie were even possible, but this version of the movie was scrapped. The film was reinvigorated when Disney approached Amblin Entertainment to produce the film after the success of movies like E.T. Of course, that means that Steven Spielberg was now involved, and with his direction and vision, he managed to convince several competing cartoon studios to lend their characters to the movie in order to make the cartoons in-universe recognizable. After working with Spielberg on Back to the Future, Disney saw Robert Zemeckis as a winner again, so they hired him as director and hired Canadian animator Richard Williams as the director of animation. The cast of the movie featured all of the talented and canonical voices for their cartoon characters, and apparently a multitude of really big Hollywood names were floated and approached before the live-action cast was settled upon, with Christopher Lloyd doing an amazing job as Judge Doom, and Bob Hoskins in what might be his best and most iconic role. I was gonna say that Smee might be a contender because he surely is, but the film snobs will also get mad at me for not mentioning he was in Mona Lisa. Either way, we can all agree that Super Mario Bros. Was shit. The film was released in 1988 and was instantly and resoundingly lauded by anyone who saw it. Critics praised the technical achievements as the film had all the complications of both a live-action movie and an animated feature. The live-action parts were all shot like a normal movie, and then the black and white film shots of each frame were given to the artists and animators. The animators then hand-drew animation cells over top of the live-action film stills. The film was then given over to another team who was responsible for making sure that the lighting and shading effects on the animated characters and the shadows that they cast matched the lighting effects of the live-action set. This whole process sounds exhausting. I'm exhausted just talking about it. There's a reason many people credit this as the reason for the Disney Renaissance. I still think it was The Little Mermaid, and you can hear my reasons why in this video. Likely it was probably both movies, but it's clear that Roger Rabbit was historically significant as it also features Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse on screen together for the first time, along with many other famous cartoon characters interacting with their live-action counterparts seamlessly. It's both a technical achievement and a milestone in movie making, and Wolf has even gone on to write a sequel that ties in closer to the movie rather than the original book that he wrote. Spoiler time, but actually, go watch this movie. Even if you've already seen it, it's probably time you watched it again. But wait till after this video. Hard-boiled and hard-drinking detective Eddie Valiant is hired by R.K. Maroon, the head of Maroon Cartoon Studios, because one of his best cartoon actors, Roger Rabbit, is not performing at his best because there are rumors going around about his wife Jessica. Maroon wants Valiant to tail her in order to prove whether she is innocent or not.
His wife's poison, but he thinks she's Betty Crocker.
After seeing Jessica perform at a nightclub, Valiant takes photos of Jessica playing patty cake with the owner of the Acme Corporation, Marvin Acme. Upon showing RK and Roger these photos, which are in fact just the pair playing actual patty cake, Roger leaves, exclaiming that this must be a setup and that he and his wife will be happy. The next morning, Valiant is called in by the police to the Acme warehouse, where Marvin Acme was found dead with a safe dropped on him. This hits close to home as it's eerily similar to how Eddie's brother was killed with an anvil. The police tell Valiant that Roger Rabbit is suspect number 1, and Judge Doom says that he'll do everything in his power to dispose of Roger using a new concoction called the Dip that can kill cartoons. Upon returning home, Valiant finds Roger hiding out at his place and agrees to help hide him and clear his name. He hides the rabbit in his friend Dolores' bar. Later, Jessica Rabbit calls on Valiant and claims she is innocent, and both she and Valiant were set up to take those photos because someone is after Marvin Acme's will, which would bequeath all of Toontown back to the Toons. Eddie and Roger discover that Maroon Cartoons has recently been bought out by Cloverleaf, which has been buying up businesses all over town. They then head back to interrogate RK Maroon. While Eddie is investigating, Roger is knocked out and RK is shot and killed right before Eddie. As Eddie looks outside, he sees Jessica Rabbit running away. He follows her to Toontown, where he catches up with her, and she reveals that Judge Doom is actually the culprit. But then Judge Doom captures the two. Back in the Acme warehouse, Doom reveals that he is planning to use the Dip to remove Toontown and replace it with a highway, which, let's be honest, is pretty sinister. Nobody wants to find out their home is going to become a highway a la Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. While attempting to escape, Valiant discovers that Judge Doom is in fact a Toon masquerading as a human, and is the same Toon that killed Marvin Acme, RK Maroon, and Eddie's own brother. Because of this, Eddie uses Doom's own Dip supply to dissolve him. Eddie also deduces that the love letter that Roger had penned to his wife when he was desperate was written on the same piece of paper that Marvin Acme used to write his will in Disappearing Ink, which includes the deed to Toontown, which he gifts back to the Toons. Based on what happens in the story, it's easy to tell that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a hard-boiled detective movie with a twist. Although ultimately a comedy, this movie parodies and in a lot of ways actually nails the tropes, tone, and aesthetics of a noir detective movie. Everything from the unsolved murder of Eddie's brother, which leads him to drink, to the classic twisted turns, right down to the actual camera angles used, all scream noir. I spent a lot more time talking about noir aesthetics in the Jessica Jones video, but suffice to say that the only thing missing from Roger Rabbit is the fact that this movie is not in black and white.
Work's been kinda slow since cartoons went to color.
One of the classic features of any good film noir is the femme fatale. This is a sultry woman that represents danger or risk to the protagonist in the form of sexual temptation. They are often an uncredible source of information and usually mixed up in the shady events of the central mystery in one way or another. In this role, we have Jessica Rabbit, who is possibly the quintessentially almost stereotypical femme fatale. She is suspicious, almost certainly mixed up in the story, and of course her sexuality is dialed up to 11. For the purposes of creating the genre piece, Jessica is basically filling the role of a stereotype. She's voiced by Kathleen Turner, who herself famously played the role of a femme fatale in Body Heat, so the intention behind her character is clear. Jessica has a personality, but mostly she's in the movie to represent what all femme fatales represent in noir, and that is intrigue and allure in both the mystery and their sexuality. But Jessica Rabbit isn't just a stereotype of the femme fatale. She certainly occupies that role in the movie and has all the hallmarks of that archetype, but throughout the story we also see that she has stakes in the mystery and is intelligent enough to figure out that she needs to be careful about who to trust in achieving her goals. Most intriguingly is not just that Jessica has a well thought out goal that fits into the plot, but what that goal actually is. For most of the movie, Jessica is so super suspicious that it's clear she's up to something. She may not be the killer, but there's no way she isn't hiding or planning some kind of scheme. The way that the movie shows her knocking out Roger Rabbit and then leaving right after R.K. Maroon is killed makes her out to be the villain. On top of that, she was already caught in a compromising situation with the now dead Marvin Acme, which makes it seem like she is the one framing Roger Rabbit. From Eddie's, and by extension our point of view, she spends most of the movie as a suspect, if not the primary villain. This actually works in favor for treating her more than just the femme fatale. It certainly would not be the first time that a female was underestimated in a noir and then turned out to be the true killer, even though she was the one who hired the PI protagonist. So it's not as though Jessica is only a pretty face, or an exaggerated one, because it's clear that she has wants and needs and works towards them throughout the plot. But this is, again, another kind of stereotype. The villain turning out to be the woman who is overtly sexual and sexualized starts to feel like a morality play. Women who are sexual are often treated with this kind of narrative disdain. Sexuality, bad. Sexual woman, bad. Noirs are usually filled with all kinds of bad people who may not be the culprit, but are still not good people. A sexual woman may not be the villain in the end, but she is considered to be involved in something shady, and that means she is viewed as trouble by the protagonist, so he knows he shouldn't pursue her. Even if he does. Now, if you've seen the movie, you know I'm burying the lead here. Jessica is not the villain, and although she does some shady stuff from our perspective, it's totally legitimate from her point of view. She couldn't trust Valiant, as she thought he was going to bring Roger to the police or put him in harm's way, which is something she can't stand for. Because it turns out that Jessica's ultimate goal was, and has always been, to keep Roger safe and happy because she genuinely loves him.
Seriously, what do you see in that guy?
He makes me laugh.
This is a great subversion of all the expectations the audience has because of genre conventions and social conventions. Roger is played to be a dork. Funny though he may be, he is not the picture of traditional masculinity. Jessica is the embodiment of the sexual female. In Western society, there are stereotypes around what kinds of people tend to become couples, and we are generally suspicious of couples that appear mismatched, especially on the basis of physicality. But Jessica defies these expectations. Jessica herself even says,
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Which is the smartest line in this movie, as it calls out the fact that she can be sexual and attractive and yet still be motivated by her genuine love for her husband. For his part, Roger doesn't seem to be bothered by her public sexuality, and it's refreshing to see a character that is all at once morally ratified, exceedingly caring and loving, and can still be incredibly sexy. As far as Jessica's characterization goes, I'm really in favor of this kind of representation, and it would be nice if the movie gave her more screen time to explore her actions a bit more. There is, however, another level of cinema that's important to understand, and it has to do with the act of watching. By the simple fact that this is a movie, it was designed to be watched, and as was previously established, this movie in particular is a noir, and noir movies tend to be overly preoccupied with the idea of watching. The act of watching gives the observer a lot of power over the thing that's being observed, particularly in the way the object or person is observed. In Western cinema, the power of that observation has been primarily controlled by men, and this has had some very interesting effects on how media has treated women, even women with excellent character arcs and characterization. You're probably familiar with the term the male gaze, although you might not be familiar with the specifics about what it means. It is not just the way that men look at women, although that is part of it. It is more about the power that comes from the gaze and how Western society perpetuates and almost permits men to look at women in certain ways. The original concept is attributed to Laura Mulvey in her essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. In this paper, she basically broke down that because cinema was a visual medium, part of the pleasure of film came from observing. This pleasure was not just one of regular joy, but also of the sexual pleasure of scopophilia. Scopophilia is the way we derive pleasure from looking at something desirable or being looked at as an object of desire. In other words, the joy that comes from watching film is inherently voyeuristic. Jessica Rabbit represents this kind of voyeuristic looking in that the first time we see her is all about the way she looks, but also the fact that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a noir, a genre that is obsessed with looking and specifically looking at people in a very voyeuristic way, often in relation to men looking at women. The angles this movie gives the audience are also voyeuristic. The classic shot of a woman through translucent glass is a classic example, but we're also privy to Eddie watching as he gazes in on other scenes while we watch him. Mulvey continues by saying that this kind of scopophilia has placed women in film as only an object of desire. Any female character in cinema is only on screen because of the male gaze. Mulvey outlines this in 3 ways. The female is the object of desire for the male characters on screen, the male viewer, and the male behind her creation. As far as the males on screen go, we can see that Jessica Rabbit does have her own character, but as I stated, we already know that she fits into the role of the femme fatale, and that means she is largely an object of desire. In the case of noir films, she is amoral because of her sexuality, and therefore a kind of forbidden fruit, overtly sexualized, but never to be enjoyed. Jessica's fidelity is in question in the film, and so to Eddie she fills the role of temptation, which would betray his more legitimate relationship with Dolores. Even if the audience knows that Jessica is devoted to her husband, she now represents a different kind of desire as the object that can be lusted after but never achieved. The other major female character on screen is Dolores. For Eddie, she is less of an object of purely sexual desire and more of an object of representational desire. She basically exists on screen as a kind of motivator for Eddie and a goal for him to work towards. So a different kind of desire, and although she's not as attractive as Jessica, but like, that's the point of Jessica's design, she is unrealistically and overtly the male fantasy, Dolores is still a conventionally attractive woman, and both only exist for the purposes of the men on screen. In regards to the audience, the male gaze is a bit more abstract. Certainly there is the voyeuristic element in the way the movie is shot, and that plays into the audience's reaction, but the main idea here is that the movie is shot for the pleasure of the men in the audience. As such, the way Jessica, or even other women in the film are framed, is expressly with the intention of showing off the parts that the male viewer will find attractive. We even get a lot of this kind of reaction on Eddie's face as he's the stand-in for the audience during these moments of viewing, and the fact that he is the audience's perspective for the film. At a cursory glance, how often are women's bodies shown before their face? That's a very basic example and a shallow level of criticism, as a pretty face is part of the male desire in a woman, but it's certainly telling. Lastly is the male gaze in regards to the people behind the movie. Mulvey specifies this as the director and the way he points the camera. This is the same kind of framing of the female body or the female as a thing to be looked at by the audience and exaggerated in the noir aesthetic, but it goes deeper than that. I think that this can be extended to not only just the director, but any person behind the camera on the creative team, and that includes the writers and animators. These people are responsible for what the audience will see, and therefore want to frame shots and action for the audience's benefit. But because these creative roles have traditionally been filled by males, they have done this with their own bias, and created films that show off women as objects of desire, and because they think it will make audiences happy. But like I said before, only the male audiences. But Who Framed Roger Rabbit has something else going on that makes it even more interesting. It is both live action and animated. For Jessica Rabbit, that means she could be explicitly created from scratch to be the perfect object of desire. Notice I didn't say woman. Jessica is female, but she isn't represented as female in the movie beyond her looked-at-ness. I don't mean to say that Jessica isn't a woman, but because she was written, drawn, filmed, and created ostensibly by all men, she was created with the express purpose of being the most desirable, hyperbolic version of a female. She is the ultimate creation of the male gaze in regards to females on screen. When Jessica says the smartest line,
I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way,
she's calling attention to the fact that she had no say in how she looks. She was created to look that way for the purposes of being desirable. Now, whether or not this makes Jessica feminist or not is a little hard to parse out. She was created with the intention of making the perfect female object of male desire for the sake of fitting the noir genre, and this worked stunningly well. She is iconic and doesn't seem to leave the zeitgeist ever. She also has a fairly strong characterization that subverts the expectations of the genre and the amoralistic stereotype of her archetype and sexuality. I don't really know where I sit regarding whether Jessica is a good female character or not, because I do think that sexuality when owned by a woman for the reasons of her own autonomy is great, but Jessica's sexuality comes from the fact that she is drawn by men, and it means it was not of her own choice. I think if she had been written and created by females, or if there was more female input and less of the male gaze present in the film, Jessica may have turned out differently. Or perhaps she may have subverted the male gaze in cinema by simply owning her sexuality rather than being the product of the males who drew her. However, the fact that she actively draws attention to this means she may know that she is in fact the male fantasy and continues to be her true self anyway, which is a pretty sex-positive feminist move. Either way, Jessica Rabbit is probably one of the most contentious female characters in movie history, and critics constantly go back and forth against or for her, but there's no denying that she is iconic, and to ignore her longevity in pop culture would be a mistake. I'm looking at you, Disney! And that is why I think it's really, really important to ask, who's framing Jessica Rabbit? That's still the best line I've ever come up with. Here are my stray thoughts. I want to note that I said that Jessica was created by males, but many of the people behind the animation process were women. They just did not have a lot of creative control over the look of the movie, and by extension Jessica. As I said, I don't think we'll ever see a movie like this again because it was just so of its time, and it's really a culmination of a lot of creative people's work and the risque nature of the film that made it possible and really make it work, and I just don't see that happening again. However, optimistically, I will keep my feet clean just in case I do have to stick them in my mouth. Gross. Hey! Thanks so much for watching that episode. Don't forget to hit that like button like you're snapping a sleazy picture in your favorite noir film. Let me know if you think we'll ever get a Roger Rabbit sequel, or if it should maybe be about Detective Valiant and not Roger Rabbit. I had a lot of fun reading Mulvey's essay, and it's not super long, so definitely check that one out. The citation's in the description. Don't forget to subscribe and stick around for more awesome episodes of This Is a Thing, as well as the long and the short of it, our weekly podcast, and anything else we got going on right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.